Bonjour Estelle. For my presentation, I attended an event called Gagi Dolinan Imbaba Madiz, which featured a presentation by the elder Virgil Sohm. This event took place at the Dr. Paulus Cultural Center in the American Indian Community Housing Organization headquarters. The event was scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. and I arrived right on time, but it took about 20 to 30 minutes for the event to officially begin. People slowly trickled into the cultural center during this time, and there were at least 40 to 50 people that attended this event. After I arrived, the facilitator Ivy introduced herself to me and welcomed me to the event and told me to go find a seat. She smudged the room with sage before the event began and also asked various Indigenous attendees if they would like to be smudged down as well. Before the presentation began, the facilitator announced that we would be eating first. She mentioned that the elders would be served first in the line and that plates will be dished up and given to any elders who are unable to wait in the line. Everyone respected this notion and waited for the elders to be served. While I was waiting, an elder woman who sat at the same table as me told me to go dish up. I really liked this interaction. We didn't even introduce ourselves to each other or anything. We didn't say hi, she just went straight into telling me what to do. And I actually really like that because it makes me feel like I'm being treated like family. Um, the food was catered by OMC and we ate sandwiches, salads, and chicharrones. After everyone was finished eating, the presentation began with Virgil Sohm singing a traditional Anishinaabe song and playing his drum. He began this presentation by introducing himself in both Ojibwe and English. Virgil Sohm is an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Reservation, and he is from Nett Lake, Minnesota. During the presentation, he told us about a bunch of his life experiences and some stories from his travels. He mentioned that he had very little connection to his culture while growing up. One culturally related memory that he does have as a kid was going fishing with his cousins. In his adulthood, he became much more involved in the culture with the guidance of elders and other Indigenous leaders. He received his spirit name and participated in various other ceremonies throughout the years. He has also dedicated nearly 40 years of his life to learning and teaching Anishinaabe Mowin. And he mentioned that the only way that Indigenous people can fully understand the traditional teachings is by learning their native language. He worked as an Indigenous mental health practitioner in Minnesota prisons, served as an advocate for the American Indian movement, and he was a co-chair of the American Indian Mental Health Advisory Council. With all of his mental health work and advocacy, he has done work with all 11 tribes in Minnesota. One story of his that really stood out to me was during his time working as a counselor in the St. Cloud prison. He used Indigenous healing methods in his work as a counselor with talking circles, traditional teachings, and sacred medicines. One day, while he was working at this institution, there was a prison riot. The prison guards mistook him and his colleague, who was also a dear friend of his and someone who really helped him in his spiritual and cultural journey, as inmates, and they were tear gassed with the rioters. He said that the air was so thick that even the guards who had masks on were struggling to breathe. His friend had heart issues prior to this assault, and he passed away 6 months later. Virgil said that this death was the most difficult grief that he has ever experienced in his life. Months later, he met with the warden of the prison, and he mentioned that this man showed a lot of hatred in his eyes when he spoke with him. This story goes to show the reality behind the disproportionately high rates of violence that Native Americans face. Native Americans are victims of crime at double the rate of non-Native people, with 57% of the perpetrators being white people. The violence that Native Americans face in modern times directly stems from colonization and the persecution that Indigenous people faced for hundreds of years. Violence against Native Americans is arguably normalized in our society, with sports teams in the United States using racist caricatures of Native Americans as mascots. Native Americans also face high rates of incarceration, with an incarceration rate that is 38% higher than the national average. Although Virgil was wrongfully attacked by prison guards and lost his friend as a result, he remained resilient by continuing to work with incarcerated populations. He also worked through his grief with grieving ceremonies and continued being a community leader and an activist for Native rights. He mentioned that he also worked with Native inmates at Moose Lake and that the inmates would sometimes become physically aggressive with him. The physical altercations that he endured in Moose Lake are what prompted him to stop doing this kind of work. He also spoke on how he traveled to New Zealand and painted boomerangs with the Aboriginal peoples. He brought some of these boomerangs and walked around the room to show them to every table. He mentioned that he copied some of the designs that the Aboriginal people used. These boomerangs were beautifully carved, smoothed down, and painted with a lot of precision and detail, as we can see right here. I just think it looks absolutely gorgeous. During this presentation, one thing that I noticed was how the children were treated as important members of their community. This is shown by how there was a kids' corner designated for the children to play in while the presentation was taking place. This play area was located right next to the stage, so everyone could ensure that the children were being safe and taken care of. There were times when the children were noisy, but the presenter would simply speak louder or pause for a brief moment. Nobody seemed to get angry at the children for making noise, which is something that I usually see in public spaces. Instead, the audience and the presenter demonstrated a lot of compassion, patience, and respect for the children that were there. The kids' corner being placed right next to the stage is a good example of how important it is for Anishinaabe people to raise their children with Indigenous values, teachings, and cultural practices. I could not help but notice all of the beautiful artwork that encompasses every wall in the cultural center. I took a photo of the painting titled Future Self-Portrait by the artist Katie Lou Marquez. This painting shows an Indigenous woman with beaded earrings, and her heart is shown through her clothing. I also took a photo of the painting titled Manadoki by the artist Chimakwa Nibawi Stone. Next to many of this artist's paintings, there are descriptions of their work. The description next to this painting says that Manadoki means they have spirit in the Ojibwe language and expresses the deep energy that moves through all living beings. This painting shows an Indigenous person engaging in prayer and with a sacred pipe in hand. The description ends by stating that Manadoki honors the power within each of us and the wisdom passed down from the ancestors. It is important for me to note that other than the pictures of the artwork, the rest of the pictures I took are from the ACO's Facebook page. At the event, I didn't really feel comfortable taking pictures because the only other people that I saw taking pictures was the facilitator and then someone else who I think knew Virgil. So I didn't want to, I don't know, I related to a lot to what Clint said in class where he mentioned that he kind of just felt a little bit insecure while taking photos. Yeah, I totally relate to that because I just don't want to come off as like someone who is like gawking at their culture or like marveling at them, like I don't ever want to come off as disrespectful because I have a deep appreciation for Indigenous people and their culture's preservation, and I never want to come off as ignorant or like as if I'm there for the wrong reasons. According to a post that was uploaded to ACO's Facebook page after the event, approximately half of the people in attendance were from the Boys Fort Reservation. I think that it is incredible that so many people came out and traveled all this ways just to see Virgil present. This really speaks on how respected he is in his community as an elder and as someone who has dedicated so much of his life to providing care to and advocating for the rights of Indigenous people in Minnesota. As a future social worker, I want to further develop my intercultural competency skills so that I can effectively work so that I can effectively provide care to Indigenous people. When providing care to Native clients, I will regularly consult with elders and other Indigenous community members to or community leaders to ensure that I am doing all that I can to prevent further harm being inflicted onto these communities on behalf of the social work profession. I will also partner with elders and Indigenous agencies so that the Native clients I serve can have greater access to cultural programs. Overall, attending this cultural event makes these processes seem a lot less intimidating because of how welcomed I felt. In the end, there are my references. All right, thank you so much for watching.